My parents made me pay $384,000 in family support while laughing behind my back. I replied with one line. It wasn't just a number, it was a weight, a chain that had been wrapped around my ankles since I could remember. $384,000. That's what the final accounting spat out, the exact sum they deemed family support over the years, a nebulous charge that evaporated from my burgeoning career like smoke. They called it an investment, a loan without interest, a lifeline they'd thrown me. But it felt more like a ledger of my worth, meticulously tallied, each entry a reminder that even my successes were their property. I was sitting in their sprawling Tuscan-style mansion in Scottsdale, the kind of place that boasted more square footage than my first apartment had entire rooms, the scent of lemon verbena and old money thick in the air. Dad, a titan of industry with a handshake like a vice and a smile that never quite reached his cold blue eyes, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table. Mom, a creature of impeccable poise and silent judgment, her face a mask of practiced grace, was pouring more of that ridiculously expensive California Chardonnay. Mark, our brother, always the golden child, the heir apparent, lounged in an armchair, a smirk playing on his lips. He'd always been the one who didn't have to justify his existence, who was born with a silver spoon already welded to his palate. This particular Sunday dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a perfunctory nod to my recent promotion to senior partner at the law firm. They'd invited me over, ostensibly to congratulate me, but I knew there was an agenda, a reason they'd lured me into their gilded cage. It always came back to the money. Every conversation, every family gathering, eventually circled back to the intricate web of finances they'd spun around us. They'd built their empire on a foundation of carefully orchestrated generosity that felt more like control. My college tuition, that starter home down payment, even the down payment on my first serious car, all presented as gifts, but always with a subtle undertow, a gentle reminder of my indebtedness. Then came the family support bill, delivered with a flourish by my father, a binder thick with spreadsheets and justifications. It was during the final stages of setting up my firm, when I was pouring every waking hour, every ounce of energy, into making it a reality. They presented it as a gesture of solidarity, a way to ensure I had the capital to succeed, but it felt like a preemptive strike, a way to ensure I remained tethered. I'd swallowed my pride, the sheer absurdity of it all, and agreed. I'd signed the papers, the clauses hidden in plain sight, a testament to their legal prowess and my naivete. The support had been drawn out over 5 years, subtle deductions from my inheritance accounts, loans against future earnings that were never clearly defined. And now, here it was, laid bare on their pristine dining table, the final tally. The wine tasted like acid on my tongue. Mark cleared his throat, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. So, Sarah, heard you crushed it at the firm. Really something. Dad must be so proud. Dad grunted, a sound that could mean anything from approval to utter indifference. Mom offered a tight smile. Yes, dear, we are quite pleased, though, of course, this is all thanks to the foundation we provided. The words landed like tiny darts. Foundation.
As if my hard-won achievements, the sleepless nights, the sacrificed personal life, were simply a byproduct of their magnanimity. I looked at the binder, the neat columns of dates and dollar amounts, each one a phantom limb of my own earnings. $384,000, I said, my voice unnervingly calm. It was an observation, a simple statement of fact. Dad leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. Precisely, Sarah. That's the amount we've graciously advanced you over the years. Think of it as an investment in your future. We believe in family supporting family. He gestured vaguely with his fork, a motion that felt dismissive. And now that you're doing so well, it's time to settle up. Settle up. The phrase hung in the air, a cold, hard transaction. Mark chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Yes, time to pay the piper. Wouldn't want Dad to have to start charging us all interest, right? He winked at me, a conspiratorial gesture that felt like a slap. The air in the room thickened, the scent of lemon verbena replaced by something acrid and bitter. I could feel a flush creeping up my neck, a wave of heat that had nothing to do with the Scottsdale sun. My mother's gaze, usually so carefully neutral, flickered with something I couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps a hint of amusement, perhaps something darker. I remembered the countless times I'd confided in my mother, pouring out my anxieties about the firm, the pressure, the sheer exhaustion. She would listen, nod, offer platitudes about grit and determination, but never once did she acknowledge the financial chasm that separated my burgeoning attendants from their established wealth. The family support was never mentioned in those conversations, a phantom debt I was apparently expected to acknowledge and amortize without question. Now, faced with the stark reality of the number, the casual way they threw it around, I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. This wasn't just about recouping their investment. This was about power. This was about reminding me of my place, of my dependence, of the invisible strings that still bound me to them. I thought about the late nights at the office, the missed birthdays, the relationships I'd let wither because my career demanded everything. All of it, apparently, was fodder for their carefully curated ledger. My father, ever the pragmatist, continued, "We've also decided to make some adjustments to the trust, Sarah. Given the recent economic climate, and to ensure the continued prosperity of the family legacy, Mark will be taking a more active role in its management. Your allocation will of course remain substantial, but Mark's will be significantly increased. It's only prudent." Mark, of course Mark, the prodigal son, the one who drifted through life on a cushion of privilege, now being rewarded with an even larger share of the pie. My promotion, the blood, sweat, and tears I'd poured into my career, had evidently not impressed them enough to alter the long-standing plan, the plan where Mark inherited everything, and I was expected to be grateful for whatever crumbs were left. The substantial allocation felt like a mockery. A memory flashed, sharp and unwelcome. Christmas 5 years ago. I'd just finalized a landmark case, one that had garnered significant media attention and a substantial bonus. I'd wanted to treat my parents, to show them I could stand on my own 2 feet, financially.
I'd booked us a weekend at a luxury resort. Champagne, fine dining, the works. My father had accepted, but his conversation throughout the weekend had revolved around my financial imprudence and the importance of responsible stewardship of familial assets. He'd even casually mentioned how much easier it would be if I just consolidated my assets with the family holdings, effectively putting them under his direct control. I'd brushed it off then, chalking it up to his overbearing nature. Now, it felt like a premonition. They hadn't just been asking for repayment, they'd been setting the stage for a complete divestment of my autonomy. The room was silent, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick a hammer blow to my composure. I looked at my father, his face etched with an almost predatory satisfaction. I looked at my mother, her expression unreadable, a porcelain doll concealing a calculating mind. I looked at Mark, his smugness radiating like heat. They were waiting for my response, for the usual acquiescence, the tearful pleas, the grudging acceptance of their terms. They expected me to crumble, to beg, to confirm their belief in my inherent weakness. They expected me to be Sarah, the dutiful daughter, always indebted, always under their thumb. But something had shifted. The humiliation, the suffocating weight of their control had coalesced into something else. It was a quiet, simmering rage, a fierce resolve that burned through the layers of ingrained deference. The wine glass trembled slightly in my hand. My breath hitched. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the Chardonnay, letting the cool liquid slide down my throat. I could feel their eyes on me, their anticipation of palpable pressure. This was it. The moment they'd orchestrated, the moment they expected to see me deflate. They thought they held all the cards, that their wealth, their influence, their carefully constructed narrative was impenetrable. They'd spent years cultivating my dependence, nurturing my insecurities, all while building a fortress of their own making. But they'd underestimated the resilience of the human spirit, the power of a broken heart to forge an unyielding will. They'd nurtured my ambition, yes, but they'd also inadvertently forged my determination. They'd given me the tools, the education, the opportunities, all under the guise of benevolence. But in doing so, they'd also given me the means to dismantle their carefully constructed world. The anger wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, glacial shift, a deep-seated transformation born from years of subtle slights and unspoken judgments. I placed the wine glass back on the table, the soft clink echoing in the tense silence. I met my father's gaze directly, then my mother's, and finally Mark's. Their expectant smiles faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. They were sensing a change, a departure from the script they had so meticulously written. The $384,000 was a symbol, a tangible representation of their power, but it was also a debt I was ready to shed. The real cost hadn't been the money itself, but the erosion of my self-worth, the constant feeling of inadequacy they had so expertly fostered. They had banked on my fear, on my ingrained loyalty,
on my desire for their approval. They had played their game, and now I was about to introduce a new set of rules.
The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed pride, of biting my tongue, had finally culminated in this moment. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a premonition of the storm that was about to break. They were waiting for me to beg, to plead, to accept my diminished role. They were waiting for tears. But tears wouldn't pay this debt. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. The humiliation of the past, the weight of their constant judgment, had been a heavy burden. But it had also been a crucible, forging a strength I never knew I possessed. The thought of their hidden laughter, their private jokes at my expense, fueled a fire that burned hotter than any resentment. It was a silent acknowledgement of their belief that they were untouchable, that their control was absolute. They saw my acquiescence as a weakness, a sign of my perpetual dependence. They were so wrong. They had taken my money, my time, my energy, all under the guise of family duty. They had watched me strive, and then they had presented me with the bill. They had wanted me to feel small, insignificant, and eternally in their debt. They had wanted to see me break. But I hadn't broken. I had simply been gathering my strength, learning their game, and waiting for my moment. The years of pretending to be the grateful, slightly insecure daughter had been a performance, a carefully crafted act. My father cleared his throat again, impatience lacing his tone. Well, Sarah, we're not getting any younger. Your mother and I have plans. Plans. Their plans always involved consolidating their power, ensuring the continuation of their dynasty, with Mark firmly at the helm. My role was to be the obedient, capable daughter, supporting the male heir, never threatening his position. The $384,000 was just a down payment on that expectation. I picked up my wine glass again, swirling the crimson liquid, its richness a stark contrast to the emptiness I felt in their presence. The weight of their gazes was immense, a tangible force pressing down on me. They were so confident, so assured of their victory. They had always been this way, their world a carefully constructed edifice of privilege and entitlement. They had never had to truly fight for anything, and that was their fatal flaw. They understood acquisition, control, and legacy, but they didn't understand the quiet, tenacious strength of someone who had been underestimated for a lifetime. I looked at my father, his face a mask of expectation. Then I looked at my mother, her practiced composure unwavering. And then I looked at Mark, his smirk widening, anticipating my capitulation. They thought they had me cornered. They thought this was the end of my brief flirtation with independence. They expected a tearful apology, a promise to pay, a reaffirmation of my subordinate status. They expected the same old Sarah. But that Sarah was gone, replaced by someone who had finally seen the truth, someone who was no longer afraid of their judgment or their money. The sheer audacity of presenting that bill, of framing it as family support while they lived in such extravagant luxury, was the final insult. It wasn't just the money, it was the arrogance, the blatant assumption of my continued subservience, the laughter they'd shared behind my back, the veiled condescension, the subtle manipulations. It all coalesced into a burning clarity. They didn't see me as a partner or even an equal.
I was a resource, to be managed and accounted for. I took a deep breath, the air in the opulent dining room suddenly feeling thin. The words I was about to speak weren't born of anger or sadness, but of a cold, hard logic. They had presented me with their final demand, their ultimatum. They had laid out their terms for my continued place, however diminished, within their family structure. They had expected a plea. They were about to receive a pronouncement. I set my wine glass down with a soft click. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet, measured, and utterly devoid of the emotion they expected. I met my father's piercing gaze, then my mother's, and finally Mark's. The smirk on his face had begun to fade, replaced by a look of cautious curiosity. They were leaning in, waiting for me to confess my weakness, to admit defeat. They were waiting for me to ask what I could do. "This isn't a bill," I said, my voice steady. The words hung in the air, cutting through the carefully constructed facade of the evening. Their expectant expressions flickered, a hint of confusion creeping in. Dad frowned. "Sarah, I don't think you're understanding." I cut him off, my tone unwavering. "It's an invoice." The silence that followed was deafening. Their faces registered a dawning realization,
a slow-motion understanding that the script had just been ripped to shreds. The smirk on Mark's face vanished completely, replaced by a look of startled disbelief. Mom's composure wavered, a tiny tremor in her perfectly still hands. My father's eyes narrowed, the cold blue depths assessing me with a new, unsettling intensity. They had presented me with their terms of surrender, expecting me to meekly accept. But they had underestimated the depth of my resilience. They had underestimated the power of a daughter finally seeing her parents not as benevolent providers, but as architects of her own carefully managed diminishment. And they had never seen the quiet strength that bloomed in the shadows of their own making. The family support was no longer a debt. It was a transaction, and I was about to cash a very different kind of check. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. My father's frown deepened, a fissure in his usually unblemished facade of control. He opened his mouth to speak, to reassert his authority, to remind me of my place. But I spoke again, my voice carrying a new, dangerous edge that hadn't been there moments before. An invoice, Dad, for services rendered. I let the word services hang in the air, loaded with unspoken implications. They had provided support, but what had I provided in return? Years of my life, my energy, my emotional bandwidth, all poured into a family dynamic that now felt like a hostile takeover. Mark shifted in his armchair, his usual languid posture replaced by a restless energy. He glanced at my father, then at my mother, a silent question in his eyes. My mother, for the first time all evening, looked genuinely unsettled. The carefully painted veneer of calm cracked, revealing a sliver of something raw, and perhaps a little fearful. They had expected tears, pleas, or at best a grudging acceptance of their terms. They had not expected a renegotiation. They had not expected them to present them with their own coin. Services? My father finally managed, his voice tight. Sarah, this is absurd. We're talking about family, about your upbringing, about the foundation we provided for your entire life.
It's not a business transaction, isn't it? I countered, my gaze unwavering. I gestured to the thick binder on the table, the meticulously itemized list of my supposed debts. You've been tracking my finances, my earnings, my every significant step since I first started making money. You've quantified my contributions, my advances. You've treated my life as an investment portfolio. So when I say invoice, I mean precisely that. What was the return on your investment, Dad? Did you anticipate a 100% payback rate on my childhood, on my college education, on the years I spent sacrificing personal relationships and sleep to build the career you now use as leverage? The color drained from my father's face. He was a man accustomed to issuing invoices, not receiving them. He was a man who understood leverage, who wielded power like a finely honed weapon, but he had never encountered this particular brand of counterattack. My mother stood straighter, her hands now clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. She was assessing the situation, calculating the damage, her mind already racing through the implications of this unexpected turn. Mark, ever the opportunist, leaned forward. Whoa, sis, hold on. What exactly are you saying? Are you sending us an invoice? His voice held a hint of amusement, a desperate attempt to reframe this as a bizarre joke, a deflection. But the glint in his eyes betrayed a dawning unease. He knew the games my father played, the intricate financial structures he built. He knew that if I was speaking this language, it was because I have learned it, perhaps even mastered it. Not exactly, I said, letting the silence stretch again, savoring their discomfort. Because my invoice would be considerably longer and far more devastating. This is about your invoice to me, the one for $384,000. You see, I've been doing some accounting of my own. I picked up the binder, not with anger, but with a strange detachment, as if I were examining a foreign artifact. You presented this as a family loan, an investment, but you never mentioned the collateral, did you? You never mentioned the true cost of this support. My father scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. The collateral was your success, Sarah. The collateral was the secure future we ensured for you. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. The collateral was my autonomy. The collateral was my independence. The collateral was the emotional and psychological toll of knowing that every success was tainted. Every step forward was measured against a debt that was never truly defined. You didn't just loan me money. You loaned me dependence. You loaned me the constant, gnawing insecurity that I wasn't enough on my own. My mother finally spoke, her voice a strained whisper. Sarah, please, this is not the time for this. We were trying to have a civilized conversation. Civilized,
I repeated, a dry, humorless laugh escaping me. Is it civilized to present your adult daughter with a bill for nearly $400,000 after years of subtle manipulation and emotional blackmail? Is it civilized to laugh behind her back when she's struggling, knowing she's already beholden to you? You call this a foundation. I call it a cage. I tap the binder. And this is the price of admission you're trying to collect. But you've forgotten a crucial clause in your own contract.
The one that states that any investment made under duress, under false pretenses, is voidable. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. He was a man who never lost his temper, not outwardly. His control was absolute, a suffocating calm that was far more terrifying than any outburst. Sarah, this is not a negotiation. This is a debt, and we expect it to be paid. And what if I can't pay it? I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. It was a calculated move, a feigned vulnerability that I knew would pique their predatory instincts. They wanted to see me cornered, desperate. Let them have their moment. What happens then? Do you revoke my inheritance? Do you cut me off completely? Do you sue your own daughter for family support? Mark chuckled nervously. Come on, Sarah, don't be dramatic. You're a senior partner. You can swing it. Just a few years of hard work and you'll be square. A few years? I echoed, my gaze drifting towards the window where the setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. You know what? You're right. It is about leverage. And you've always been so proud of your financial acumen, Dad. So proud of your understanding of assets and liabilities, of risk and reward. So let me tell you about the biggest liability in this family. I paused, letting the tension build. My father stood rigidly, his arms crossed, his jaw set. My mother watched me, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and a flicker of something akin to morbid curiosity. This was the moment, the turning point, the unveiling of a truth they had meticulously buried for years. You, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor. You are the biggest liability. Your entire empire, built on manipulation, on the suppression of anyone who dared to challenge you, on the exploitation of your own children, it's all built on a foundation of sand. My father's face contorted, the mask of control finally shattering. How dare you, he spat, his voice low and menacing. After everything we've done. Everything you've done? I interrupted, my own voice rising, the dam of my carefully constructed composure finally breaking. You talk about foundation? Let me tell you about the real foundation of this family. It's built on my mother's silence. It's built on Mark's entitlement. And it's built on your insatiable need to control every single aspect of our lives. You didn't invest in me. You invested in your own ego. You didn't provide support. You provided a leash. My mother's breath hitched. She looked at my father, a silent plea in her eyes, but he ignored her, his fury consuming him. He took a step towards me, his imposing presence filling the space. You think you know everything, don't you? You think your little law firm makes you some kind of financial wizard? No, I said, standing up, mirroring his stance. I was shorter than him, but in that moment, I felt taller. I think I know how to read a balance sheet, and I know how to spot a fraudulent transaction. This $384,000 isn't a loan, Dad. It's a fraudulent claim, and I have the documentation to prove it. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. My father recoiled, as if I'd struck him. His eyes, usually so sharp and assessing, widened with a sudden, terrifying realization. He knew my capabilities. He had, after all, funded my education, my career. He knew I wouldn't make such a statement lightly. Documentation?
He whispered, his voice barely audible. Oh yes, I confirmed, a grim satisfaction settling in. You see, when you decided to invest in my firm, you insisted on seeing my projections, my business plan. You wanted to ensure your investment was secure. You reviewed every single financial document I provided, and you were so proud of my foresight, my meticulous planning. You praised my business acumen. I let the irony wash over them. What you didn't realize in your arrogance was that I kept copies of everything, every projection, every cash flow analysis, every projected expenditure. And when you presented me with this invoice, I started comparing your support against my actual needs. The advances you claim you made weren't always aligned with the capital I actually required at the time. Some of them were premature. Others were for expenses you conveniently forgot to mention, expenses that never actually materialized. My mother gasped, a soft, choked sound. Mark leaned forward, his earlier amusement completely gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. "What are you saying, Sarah? You're saying they overcharged you? Or you didn't need the money?" "I'm saying," I clarified, my voice steady, "that the accounting you presented is selective. You conveniently omitted certain aspects of my financial planning. You've inflated the figures to justify your claim. You've essentially created a fictitious debt by cherry-picking data and presenting it as fact. And when I cross-referenced your advances with my own meticulously documented financial records from those periods, the numbers didn't add up. Not even close." My father sputtered, trying to regain his composure. "This is preposterous. You're twisting facts. We were looking out for you. Were you?" I challenged, stepping closer to the table. I pushed the binder towards him. "Let's look at the very first advance you listed, October 2015, $50,000. You called it seed money for my practice. But according to my records, my initial operating capital was secured through a traditional business loan, approved and funded in August 2015, with an interest rate far lower than what your family support implicitly carried. The $50,000 you claim you provided was actually deposited into my personal account in November, 2 months after my business loan was secured and my operations were already underway. You then listed it as a family advance against my future earnings. But it wasn't an advance for my business. It was an advance for your control. You were setting the stage, ensuring I had a debt to manage, a reason to remain tethered." My father stared at the binder, his face pale. He began to flip through the pages, his hands trembling. The meticulous spreadsheets, the neat columns of figures, the dates and amounts, they were all there, presented by him. But now they were being re-examined through a different lens. "And this one," I continued, pointing to another entry. "March 2017, $75,000. You billed it as operational capital infusion due to market volatility. But the market wasn't volatile for my practice. It was booming. My client base was expanding rapidly, and my revenue projections were exceeding expectations. I didn't need an infusion. I needed time to grow organically. This $75,000, according to my records, was deposited into a joint investment account that you control, under the guise of a family hedge fund."
"It was never invested in my firm. It was absorbed into your own portfolio, earning interest for you, not for me." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Daniel, is this true?" Her voice was a heartbroken whisper. My father didn't answer. He was too busy frantically turning pages, his face a mask of dawning horror. The sheer volume of detail I had presented, the meticulous cross-referencing, was overwhelming him. He had built his empire on layers of obfuscation and carefully curated narratives. He had assumed I would never have the resources or the inclination to peel back those layers. "And it goes on," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Each advance listed here has a corresponding record in my own books that tells a different story. Some were deposited into accounts you controlled, never directly benefiting my firm, but certainly benefiting your bottom line through investments you managed. Others were simply inflated. You would list a $20,000 transfer, but my records show only $15,000 ever cleared. The other $5,000, it vanished into the ether, or rather, into your pockets." Mark stood up now, his face a picture of shock. "Wait a minute, so you're saying they basically cooked the books? They made up half of this debt?" "Not made up," I corrected, my voice cold and precise. "They fabricated it. They manufactured it. They used their position of power and my initial trust to create a false narrative of indebtedness. They didn't invest in me. They invested in control. And now that I'm successful, now that I can potentially challenge their authority, they're trying to cash in on a debt that doesn't exist. Or rather, a debt that exists only in their carefully constructed fantasy." My father slammed the binder shut, the sound echoing in the suddenly deathly quiet room. His face was no longer just pale, it was ashen. The cold blue eyes that had always held a spark of predatory intelligence now seemed vacant, lost. He looked for the first time like a defeated man. This is impossible," he stammered, his voice raspy. "You're lying. You're trying to defraud your own family." "Am I?" I asked, my gaze steady. "Or am I simply demanding what is rightfully mine? You taught me well, Dad. You taught me the importance of due diligence, of meticulous record-keeping, of never accepting anything at face value. You taught me to question everything.
And I have. I've questioned your family support. I've questioned your investments. And I've discovered that the biggest liability in this family isn't my supposed debt. It's your willingness to create it. I reached into my briefcase, which I had placed on a side table earlier, and pulled out a slim black folder. I placed it on the mahogany table next to the thick binder of my fabricated debt. This, I said, my voice resonating with a quiet power, is my revised accounting. It details the discrepancies, the inflated figures, the misallocated funds, and the true cost of your support, which, incidentally, includes the emotional and psychological toll of your manipulation. The total amount I owe you, according to my calculations, is 0. In fact, I paused, letting the words sink in. I believe you owe me. My father stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. My mother sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Mark, his jaw hanging open, looked from the folder to his father, then back again.
The carefully constructed world they inhabited, a world of inherited wealth and unquestioned authority, was crumbling before their eyes. What are you asking for? My father managed, his voice hoarse. I met his gaze, my own eyes clear and determined. I'm asking for my inheritance, Dad, the portion that was always meant for me, without strings attached, the portion that you've effectively held hostage with this fabricated debt. I want my trust fund, my share of the family holdings, and full control over my own assets, free and clear, and I want it in writing, with all claims of family support officially rescinded. He looked at me, a flicker of his old fire returning, but it was tinged with fear. He knew I had him. He knew the depth of my meticulousness, the thoroughness of my research. He had spent years controlling me through financial leverage. Now I was wielding that same power, that same logic against him. And if I don't agree? He asked, his voice a low growl. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of grim satisfaction. Then, I said, my voice dangerously calm, I intend to file a lawsuit. A lawsuit for financial elder abuse, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. I have enough evidence, Dad, to not only clear my name, but to dismantle your entire empire. You taught me to be thorough. You taught me to be relentless. And now I will use those lessons against you. The threat hung heavy in the air. My father, the titan of industry, the man who had always held all the cards, was trapped. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated my capacity for research, my legal acumen, and my willingness to fight for what was mine. He had played a dangerous game, assuming my subservience. Now he was about to face the consequences of his own manipulations. My mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, but her gaze now fixed on me with a strange mixture of pain and something that might have been pride. She had lived a lifetime of silence, of complicity. Perhaps, in my defiance, she saw a flicker of hope. I want this resolved, Dad, I said, my voice firm. Quietly, efficiently. Because honestly, the thought of a public trial, of the details of your financial dealings being laid bare for the world to see, it's frankly embarrassing, for all of us. But I will do it if I have to. This is your choice, your invoice or my vindication. I pushed the folder closer to him. The setting sun had cast the room into a deep twilight, the opulent decor now appearing more like a gilded prison cell. The scent of lemon verbena was gone, replaced by the acrid tang of fear and betrayal. My father stared at the folder, then at me, his face a study in a man who had just realized he was about to lose everything. The power had shifted. The control, so carefully maintained for decades, had finally slipped from his grasp. And the silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of family dinners, but the taut, charged silence of a battle about to be irrevocably decided. I waited, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. The game had changed, and I was finally playing to win. The silence that followed my pronouncement was a living thing, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on us all. My father's chest rose and fell rapidly, the controlled facade he wore like a second skin, finally cracking wide open. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, darted from the slim black folder to my face, a desperate search for an escape route that wasn't there. Mark, my ruzzer, looked utterly bewildered, his mouth slightly ajar, as if he'd just witnessed a magician pull off an impossible trick. My mother, bless her, remained slumped in her chair, her hand still pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. She had always been a spectator in this family's dramas, a silent witness to the power plays, but this This was a seismic shift. My father finally exhaled, a ragged sound that seemed to tear through his throat. He reached for the black folder, his hand shaking so badly he almost knocked it off the table. His fingers, long and accustomed to signing checks and power brokering deals, fumbled with the edge of the paper. He opened it, his gaze scanning the first few pages. I hadn't included every single piece of evidence, of course. That would have been overkill, a crude display. But I had presented enough. The glaring discrepancies, the documented instances of misallocation, the irrefutable proof of inflated figures. It was a concise, devastating summary, backed by an appendix of cross-reference documents I had discreetly placed in a secure digital vault, ready for any legal challenge. He flipped through, his breathing growing shallower. A low groan escaped him, a sound of pure, unadulterated defeat. He slammed the folder shut, his face a mask of pure, raw fury, but the fire in his eyes was different now. It was the desperate, cornered rage of a predator caught in a trap, not the confident roar of a king. "You think you can do this?" he rasped, his voice raw. "You think you can just walk in here and threaten your own family after everything we've given you?" "Everything you've taken from me," I corrected, my voice level, devoid of the anger that had fueled me for so long. The anger had been a powerful engine, but now it was a dull ache, replaced by a steely resolve. "You didn't give me anything, Dad. You loaned me security and then charged me usurious interest on it, both financially and emotionally. You built a cage and called it a foundation, and now I'm breaking free, with interest." He looked at Mark, a silent plea for support, for confirmation of his perceived victimhood. Mark, however, just stared at the table, his face pale. He had always benefited from our father's dominance, always been the favorite son, the one who didn't have to fight for his place. But even he could see the writing on the wall. He had witnessed the meticulousness of my presentation, the undeniable logic of my arguments. He knew, deep down, that my father's reign of control was ending. "Sarah," my mother whispered, finally finding her voice, a small, reedy sound. "Please, don't do this. We can talk about this. There must be a way to resolve this without this." She gestured vaguely at the tense standoff, her eyes pleading. "There is," I said, turning to her. My voice softened, a rare moment of genuine tenderness. "There is a way. It's in that folder. It's a negotiated settlement. You receive your rightful inheritance, free and clear, and all claims of debt and family support are nullified. In exchange, I agree not to pursue legal action, and we all agree to move forward. Separately." The word separately landed like a bomb. It was the ultimate rejection, the final severing of the cords that had bound us, however imperfectly, for so long.
My father's face contorted. "Separately?" he spat, the word laced with venom. "You think you can just walk away from your family, from everything we built?" "You built it, Dad," I said, my gaze unwavering, "and you built it on a foundation of control and manipulation. I'm not walking away from my family. I'm walking away from the toxic dynamic you created. I'm taking what is mine, and I'm leaving the wreckage behind. You had your chance to treat me as an equal, as a partner. You chose to treat me as a ledger. So now, we settle the books." He stood up, his imposing frame looming over me. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, resort to physical intimidation, but he just stood there, trembling, defeated. The sheer audacity of my plan, the meticulous execution, had robbed him of his power. He was a man who understood numbers, who understood leverage, but he had underestimated the power of truth, especially when it was presented with cold, hard evidence. This is a betrayal," he finally choked out, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't the emotion of hurt. It was the emotion of a gambler who had just lost everything on a bad hand. "No, Dad," I said, shaking my head slowly. "It's a reckoning. You've always talked about the importance of integrity, of keeping your word. You've lectured me countless times about the consequences of dishonesty. And yet, when it suited you, you created a narrative of debt that never truly existed. You weaponized family against me. This is simply me holding you accountable for your own lessons, the ones you failed to live by." I picked up my briefcase, the familiar weight a comfort in my hand. The room was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the quiet anticipation of a storm that had finally broken, leaving behind a landscape of devastation.
My mother was openly weeping now, silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks. Mark remained frozen, his eyes wide, his expression unreadable. My father stood like a statue, his face a ruin of despair. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," I said, my voice calm and businesslike, "to finalize the terms of the settlement. You'll receive the documents within 48 hours. I expect your full cooperation." I turned and walked towards the door, the heavy oak swinging shut behind me with a soft thud that seemed to echo the finality of my departure. Stepping out of that house, out of the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home, felt like breaking the surface of water after being held underwater for far too long. The cool evening air hit my face, clean and refreshing. The manicured lawns and the imposing architecture of my family's estate now seemed like relics of a past I was deliberately leaving behind. The drive home was a blur. I didn't blast music. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, the city lights streaking by like ephemeral memories. There was no triumph, no jubilation, just a profound sense of exhaustion, of a weight finally lifted. For years, I had carried the burden of their expectations, their manipulations, their carefully constructed debt. I had lived under the shadow of their control, always feeling slightly inadequate, always feeling beholden. Now, that shadow was gone, replaced by the bright, clear light of my own agency. I had learned their language, the language of finance, of leverage, of control, and I had used it to dismantle their power.
It wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, about rewriting the ending they had so carefully planned for me. When I pulled into my own driveway, the quiet hum of my car the only sound, I sat there for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at my own house, a modest but well-kept place, filled with the evidence of my own hard work, my own independent life. It was a testament to what I could achieve without their support, without their suffocating embrace. I got out of the car, the click of the door echoing in the stillness. I walked up my own path, the familiar worn stones beneath my feet. There was no fanfare, no grand pronouncements, just a woman standing on her own property in her own life, finally free. The emotional intensity of the confrontation had drained me, but underneath the weariness, a new strength was taking root. It wasn't the swaggering confidence of victory, but the quiet, unshakable conviction of someone who had faced her demons and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably whole. The world outside my door remained the same, but I was fundamentally changed. I had taken back my power, not by fighting fire with fire, but by meticulously documenting the scorch marks and presenting the bill. And in the quiet of the night, under the vast indifferent sky, that felt like a victory worth breathing in.